Food insecurity, rising rents, out-of-control inflation, households under pressure. For an increasing number of New Zealanders, the rising cost of living has reached a crisis point with no end in sight. As policymakers look to provide short-term relief through measures such as subsidies and price caps, the structural reform needed to deliver sustainable and long-term change is often overlooked. Welcome to AUT Impact. I'm Professor John Tookey from AUT School of Future Environments. Joining me today to share their insights into this particular crisis and to discuss what needs to happen to turn things around are Emeritus Professor Elaine Rush from the School of Sport and Recreation and Dr. Peter Skilling from the Business School. Welcome to you both.
Welcome.
Elaine, it's hard to avoid obviously the rhetoric around the cost of living crisis as it currently exists. How do you think it reflects the true situation as it exists here in New Zealand, and what do you see as the way forward?
For a long time now, New Zealand has been one of the most malnourished countries in the OECD, but it's getting worse. And in particular, it's impacting on our children. Food insecurity means that a household doesn't have enough money to buy the right foods that they need because it's being spent on other things like rent and the pressures of life. It's a huge problem, and it's part of the whole system that we have in New Zealand that needs to be changed.
And Peter, how do you see the cost of living crisis at the moment?
Well, we certainly know that there's a lot of people in our communities and people we know who are having a really hard time, that their incomes are remaining the same or under pressure, and the costs that they have to face each week are going up. So this is true for a wide number of New Zealanders. I think it's important to note that there's a huge inequality with how it's experienced as well, that we've got a situation in New Zealand where the poorest half of our country, the poorest 2.5 million New Zealanders, only hold something like 2% of the national wealth. And so there are some people who, it's more of a cost of living inconvenience that they need to make difficult choices of what they cut out and what they economise on. But there are others in our society who really are making, really tough choices and who really do experience it as a crisis.
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, I spend a lot of time dealing with research around the building industry, particularly around the housing situation, and it's impossible to avoid the fact that we sit with, in Auckland, our biggest city, we sit with an average household income of about $80,000 a year, which that's inclusive of all income streams. And they come together and in that context, they have to feed themselves, they have to clothe themselves, they have to provide all the necessary, everything associated with day-to-day existence, and they've got to find sufficient funding to be able to either provide themselves with accommodation or alternatively to actually purchase a house. And if you're looking at an average house price close to $1 million in Auckland, you're talking about a 12 to 13 time multiplier associated with average incomes. This is craziness, it's madness. We're in an impossible, insoluble situation, certainly as far as the building sector is concerned.
And it's where you live that makes a big difference as well. Access to public transport, access to food or fast foods, etc. It's huge, and there really needs to be a sit down with everyone in the room, with all these different sectors, talking about our future, and particularly also with the climate crisis that is impacting more and more on everything, including the food supply.
Because I think what you've identified with housing is so central to everything. I mean, if you're in a situation where you've got your mortgage under control, or maybe you own your house outright, then you're in a really different situation from someone who's struggling to get that first foot on the housing ladder. If rents or the interest rates and your mortgage costs have just gone up so much, people are in such different situations. And like Elaine was suggesting there, housing is so central to everything. If you've got insecure housing and you maybe need to move because your rental property, you need to move out of the rental property, we know that's has a huge impact on kids' performance in schooling if they need to move from one school to another, and it just flows on to all sorts of outcomes that people are facing.
Well, we can also see, I mean, again, with my building hat on, we've also seen massive problems with regard to infrastructure more generally, specific infrastructural needs within Auckland as we grow. You know, we're seeing the demand for intensification associated with Auckland, bringing more people into the city centre, creating the infrastructure necessary to be able to support those individuals in place. And then in the background, you've got, you know, you'll see in the news, you'll see the sinkhole collapse in the middle of College Hill, and all of these sorts of things, which all speak to an infrastructure under massive stress. In the background, you've got key levels of infrastructure around, say, the bridge across the harbour and what we're going to do for the future. Because let's face it, the prospect of not having connectivity with North Shore as far as the city is concerned, and that's just as far as Auckland is concerned, as well as going more broadly, is you know, it's non-negotiable. We need to be able to invest in the infrastructure. Oh, and did we mention the effect of climate change and the requirement to stage retreat or manage retreat back from the flood-impacted zones, which are going to see significant requirements to rebuild housing, communities, etc., throughout the country. There's 15,000 kilometres of coastline. There's something like 300,000 potentially affected properties, which means that we're going to have to build, in addition to our regular day job of building things, we're going to have to build as many as 6 times the size of Hamilton in terms of replaced housing as we manage retreat from these sorts of flood-affected properties. So we have huge impacts just in that space alone.
But we do live in a wonderful country, and we're very fortunate to be here, because we're only a population of 5 million people, right, and the land area is greater than the United Kingdom. However, we do need to be more focused on future planning in a cohesive way, and trying to get into all policies and practices, because policy isn't always what people do, this recognition of planning for the future of our children. And one of the mainstays, of course it's my big passion, is around about ensuring the food supply internally in New Zealand will actually see us through a disaster. So we actually need a food plan, just like we need a housing plan, and they all need to be interrelated. But it's not doom and gloom. Everyone can do something. And everyone has a role in it, whether it's a very small thing like recycling your rubbish. It all makes a difference to the whole. We just need to be more cohesive and work together towards making life better for everyone. But some people will have to give something away to be able to get equity, to be able to bring the ones at the bottom up. There isn't enough to go around to maintain the status quo, as it were. We've got to make some huge shifts in our priorities.
Yeah, and it's interesting, I mean, those costs that you're sort of alluding to with managed retreat, or, you know, paying people the value of their house if they need to move, you know, they're just totally eye-watering costs, you know, that are sort of beyond what we can really imagine. And I think it really speaks to what Elaine is talking about the need for coherent strategic thinking, because we're in a cost of living crisis that, you know, is obviously significantly difficult for a lot of people, and the things that, you know, we've got this tendency as humans to focus on the surface level problems, on the symptoms that we can see, and if the problem is that you don't have enough money to pay your bills or the things you need to pay for each week, then it seems obvious that you would try and give people more money through something like a tax cut, or that you would lower costs, for example, taking tax off petrol. You know, but there's a very real sense where these short-term solutions that sound good, sound like they're addressing a solution, you know, end up contributing to perpetuating the problems that lead to these huge costs down the road. That if we make petrol relatively cheaper by keeping the tax off or removing the tax, you know, the effect is to incentivise more purchase and burning of fossil fuels, which is going to continue to increase the climate change effects that fuel these, you know, the costs that you're talking about, extreme weather events, and the risk that poses to housing. Also, you know, food production. I mean, all the industries that New Zealand relies on, food production, wine production, tourism, rely on a stable and predictable climate. And, you know, these short-term solutions sometimes work against what we need in the long term.
Yes.
Well, to a degree that, but to a degree that I substantially agree with what you're saying. The only issue is, as far as I'm concerned, again, because I'm in the pragmatics of, okay, how are we going to deliver these physical, concrete, bricks and bolts and all that sort of stuff, type of solutions. But I'm concerned as well when we start to talk about, for example, managed retreat. Okay, we need to do that, and there are some equity issues that are raised as far as the equity, as far as the managed retreat documentation is concerned. Certainly, the consultation documents that we've seen. But I'm concerned that, as an example, we actually need to re-establish when you do go back from the communities at risk and you do move away from those to safer locations. You need to re-establish an economy to be able to support communities, because I can see my worst case scenario, particularly in the context of what Elaine was saying with regard to food production, is that we start to depopulate some rural areas because we're not re-establishing an economy locally to facilitate total re-establishment of all the economic activity that's taking place in the communities that you just moved. For instance, without going into the details of the consultation documentation that came through, there was only sort of partial remuneration or recovery of costs for businesses. Well, if businesses are sitting in rental accommodation, which most of them are, on the one hand, they only get a fraction of the business cost, and on the other hand, the rentor only gets half of their half of the property valuation. So what you're going to likely to see is a lot of businesses will not be re-established in the new location. Now, to me, that's a major risk, because I want to see sustainability of communities at every level. Not just the physical. Well, they're not going to get flooded anymore. This is the sort of level that needs to do, and particularly when it comes to maintaining productivity in places like Hawke's Bay and those sorts of locations, have been heavily affected.
Yes, it's unintended consequences have
Always
to be thought through very carefully with the systems lens. And we need to be looking more at prevention rather than treatment in healthcare and housing, in climate change, because unless we invest in our future children in particular, there is going to be this huge crisis of older people filling up the hospitals and taking up even more health care, and there won't be enough left over to look after them. So it's a bit like lemmings off a cliff, but we need to put the fence off up at the top of the cliff and try and actually say this is more important than that. We have to make some hard decisions.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. As I say, where it all sort of, I don't say falls down for me, but as I say, I'm just trying to think how governments prioritise the spending that they're going to take over the next X number of years, over the next 2 or 3 governmental cycles, particularly with regard to some of the bigger infrastructure components, in order to be able to deliver on all these sorts of things.
I do think we rely too much on government, that maybe as civil society, and particularly with our lobbying and bringing things to the public attention, need to take more control. Because I hear so often, they should do this, or the government should do that. But really, we are the government. We elect them. And we say what the priorities are.
And sometimes I think there are situations where the most effective thing the government can do is step back and allow for that civil society and that community action to happen. Because when we're talking about, there's often this tension between the things that might seem attractive in the short term, giving people more money, restricting prices, and things that meet our long-term challenges as well. You end up trying to think where the win-win solutions might be. And for some people, if energy prices are a major part of their cost of living challenge that they're facing, then giving people more options with that, and either providing incentives or making it more possible for household level and community level energy generation, whether it's incentives and subsidies for solar panels on roofs, or just making it easier and more possible for communities to band together and maybe invest in. I was certainly, to me, the whole solar approach, or any other sort of energy generation opportunities at a local level, micro level, has got to be a very positive thing as we
I guess I've got my infrastructure head on again. It's all very well going entirely into an electric world, as it were. But when the infrastructure associated with power distribution is subject to the vagaries of weather, I mean, I was cut off for 6-7 days as a result of Gabrielle earlier on this year. The only thing that's got me was a generator on the one hand, and the fact I got solar panels on the roof. It works, the system works, and there's no question about it. To create the conditions where individuals can self-help in the first instance has got to be a better thing as far as government is concerned.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like it ticks so many boxes at once. There's that resilience in difficult situations. There's the sense of communities and people coming together, and potentially, insulating households and communities from price shocks of, if there's large energy retailers, generators retailers, who can dictate prices under certain conditions. It does seem to tick a cost of living crisis box as well as those climate change and resilience.
Well, I can certainly say from personal experience, the fact that I had the solar panels on the roof, my next door neighbour is now getting solar panels on his roof as well. So, it has that sort of cascade effect when it's sort of monkey see, monkey do, oh, that works, I like that. And then, people taking advantage. And I've not seen what the level of, have you seen any of the level of uptake as far as these incentive schemes are concerned?
Of course, it's very expensive to put solar panels and batteries and to have an EV car and those sorts of things. So there's a lot of people that can't do that. But the other essential for life that we haven't been looking after well is our water supply too. Yeah. Which is also something that we need to plan for the future and, the disposal of it. What is it now? 8 waters they're up to? 8 different things to do with the water
me,
that needs to be cohesive and actually preserve that. You die in 3 days without water, you'll die in a couple of months without food.
Because of where I live, I had to install water off the roof. That's how we live. So I'm not off grid by any means. It'd be lovely to be so, but I don't think anybody can realistically afford to be off grid in that way. But certainly, I think there's options for being able to ameliorate some of the worst demands on water distribution and water treatment and water reticulation and so on. Infrastructure by installing things like grey water tanks in properties, and that should be, one of the principal things that you incorporate as part of your...
And more community gardens.
Absolutely.
And that sharing of resources and fellowship too, because it's so important that we work together and actually work as communities rather than saying the individual is responsible.
Yeah, well, there is some merit though associated with getting to a point where individuals are motivated to self-help in the first instance, which has positive long-term effects, which can generate the outcomes that you're seeking to achieve.
Children as yet unborn, they don't have any self-determination, but what we are doing is actually affecting them. I've just published a paper about food insecurity during pregnancy and how it affects the child's academic achievement at school. So we've got to have that long-term view of what we invest now in making sure pregnant mums are well nourished, for instance, is given a priority because it's not going to get better. Humans are not that resilient. If you're malnourished, you can't function and we won't be a productive society.
Yeah, it's a fair point. Would it be fair to say that this is a complicated sort of an issue that we're struggling to get on top of, but there are a few, shall we say, bright points we can point to and say that we're making efforts in that direction?
It's a wicked problem.
Yeah. Could I just, John, take you back to, you started our discussion with talking about issues around the price of housing, which impacts people whether you're attempting to buy or the price of rental. Do you see solutions for that? Like with your construction hat on or planning, can you see solutions to, just because we've agreed that housing is so central, you're not going to get involved in the community garden that's local if you don't have secure housing. It's got impacts across the board. Can you see solutions there?
Yes, but they're not necessarily the sorts of solutions that everybody really wants to hear. I'll give you an example. If you want to really break the back of the cost issue of housing, then what you do is you procure very large numbers with a defined outcome, and you actually build ahead of the market. At the moment, everything gets drip fed into the market, which maintains prices, right? Because nobody wants to dump product onto the market and overwhelm the market with supply and therefore depress prices, which creates a house price collapse, because so many people in the electorate, their biggest single point of investment is the mortgage or the property that they own. So no government wants to step into that space. But if you want to change the game, what you have to do is build ahead of the market. And it becomes problematic to do that because of the effect it's going to have long term on marketable values and the fact that it diminishes people's personal wealth. That's why I say it's not an easy solution to have.
Yeah, and it's obvious that it's become, over generations politically toxic to talk about anything that's likely to have a major impact on house prices. Even not just national but successive Labour leaders have ruled out a capital gains tax.
Or a wealth tax, yeah.
And so it's politically difficult, even if we can agree, that in the long term, society at large and many people would benefit from more affordable housing. If you hold, like you say, if you hold your wealth in your own house and investment properties, they're the people that tend to vote more often in elections.
That brings on a whole separate conversation, which is around, are we talking about a housing crisis, or are we talking about a cost-efficient, tax-efficient investment opportunity for people with surplus capital, which is an entirely different exercise. Most people who invest in property, as in rental properties, are doing to fund their retirement, which says a lot about the current state of retirement. I need to stop you there on the basis of the fact that we've done a bit of tour d'horizon of everywhere and everything. I think we can agree that we're not in a position where we have all the answers, but we are working on it mightily, as it were. And with that happy thought in mind, I'm going to close off this exercise today. Thank you for listening. I hope you've been interested in what we've been talking about.